welcome to another edition of Storytelling on Orchard Street. I'm Pete Salamina, your host. We are in the P&T Knitwear bookstore, 180 Orchard Street. With me in the studio today is Francine Witte. Francine's flash fiction and poetry have appeared in numerous journals. Most recently, her stories have been in Best Small Fictions and Flash Fiction America. Her latest flash fiction book is Just Outside the Tunnel of Love. I think we have that. That's it. And that's on Blue Light Press. And she has an upcoming collection of poetry. Some Distant Pin of Light is forthcoming from Cervena Barva Press. She lives in New York City. Visit her website, Francine Witte, FranCineWitte.com. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes. We had a nice little chat. We both got here early.
Yes, we did.
And we sat, for some reason, I'm so sorry. No, you're on. I'm having trouble hearing you. Maybe a little closer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to talk.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, okay.
We had a little pre-interview sitting outside, and it's a beautiful day here in Lower East Side, spring.
Gorgeous.
Yes. So we have things to talk about, don't we?
We do.
Okay. First, I'd like the listeners to get a little background on my guest, outside of or including how you became a poet and a writer.
Sure. Well, I was always interested in writing poetry. I think I wrote my first poems when I was 13, and didn't do very much with them. But later on, I went back to college.
What were they about? Do you remember?
Yeah, like they were very rhymey.
Okay.
And they were very dark.
Oh.
I wrote a lot about the devil's call, and, like the war, the war that's going on and everything. Huh. And so I was
Vietnam?
This was actually before Vietnam.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like back in the 60s,
Right.
Early 60s.
Right.
And so then later on, I started writing again, and I learned how to write free verse, and I really fell in love with it. Mm-hmm. And later on, I gravitated to flash fiction.
Right.
And I also wrote one-act plays for a while.
How about post-high school? Did you study writing?
My 20s were just kind of like a blur.
But, by the way, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Queens.
Right, you're a Queens gal.
Queens, New York.
You're not the first Queens gal that's been on the show.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And you currently live in Manhattan.
I do. I live on the Upper East Side.
Did you ever live anywhere else?
I lived in Vermont.
Okay.
Burlington, Vermont. I went to school there.
Oh, it's beautiful up there.
Yeah.
I love Vermont.
Yeah, I was there when Bernie...
What school did you say you went to?
The University of Vermont.
Okay, right.
And I was there when Bernie became the mayor.
Wow.
He won by 10 votes.
Wow. Close race.
He went around,
How many people voted?
well, you know what he did? There was like a machine in power at
Okay.
that point, like this family that had been the mayor forever.
Right.
And he went around and got all the college kids registered.
Oh, yeah, that's smart.
And that's
right.
who voted him in, and
Right.
he won by 10. Yeah, and everybody was like amazed, So that was my first exposure to Bernie, and he really, made Burlington kind of a much more fun place to live.
Nice.
And so I lived there for 5 years, and then I moved to Buffalo.
What did you study? Did you say
English.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Because when I went back to school, the first time I tried school right after high school, I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
I really was just kind of a
lot of teenagers don't know what they're doing. College is a pretty big step.
I was like, what am I doing? Right. So I just ended up sort of floating around for a few years after that. And when I went back to college, it was like, well, I'm going to do this for what I'm really interested in and not what I think I could get a job as.
Right.
And so I said, I've always been interested in writing, so I'll become an English major.
Nice.
And that's when I started taking writing workshops and studied with, my first writing teacher was Julia Alvarez, who is just a big deal, and I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
So, but she really taught me a lot. She really taught me a lot about writing, being very concrete in your your imagery and all that. And then I just went on. I went on and got a master's, and we were talking outside about Shakespeare. I studied a lot of Shakespeare, and
So good.
I kind of thought about going a little. It was either going to be I was either going to go for a PhD in Shakespeare, or I was going to pursue the writing, and I went with the writing.
Okay.
So.
And then eventually you became a teacher?
Yeah, because, well, after my first marriage failed, I was like, well, now what am I going to do? So I was in Buffalo.
So you said first, how many have there been?
2.
Okay.
I'm on my second.
All right.
And he's a keeper, so I think I'll stick with him.
Okay.
But, so...
I was just wondering if you were the Elizabeth Taylor of the writing world.
I guess if I were going to live until 150...
Right.
That probably...
That could be. You might make that.
There probably would have been a few more. But I shouldn't say that, really. My husband's watching. So...
He knows you love him.
He does,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
So the teaching. So I had studied all this English. I had my master's in English. I didn't really quite know what to do with it. So I went and got my teacher certification.
Okay.
And then I moved back to New York City. I had been out of New York City for 13 years. I moved back, and I didn't want to become a teacher. I came back to study playwriting because I had had a play produced up in Buffalo.
Nice. Okay. What was the play about?
It was called Burying 4D, and it was about this woman who the upstairs neighbor dies and falls through the floor into her, the bathtub had overflowed, falls through the floor, and now so she is going to have the funeral for the woman in apartment 4D who she really didn't know.
Right.
Because she's this lonely old woman.
Holy cow, what a story.
And so it got produced, and it was it was really kind of a lot of fun.
Right.
And it was,
by that subject matter, I'm guessing it wasn't a musical.
It was a comedy.
Really?
It was a comedy.
Wow, okay. A dark comedy.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, I'd like to. So I was at this point where, okay, what am I going to do now? And so I thought, I'll go back to New York, study playwriting at Playwrights Horizons.
Okay.
And I'll be a temp during the day.
Right.
I'd done a lot of that during my 20s. I temped a lot during my 20s. And so I came back, and the temp market really wasn't as good as I thought it would be. It had kind of dried up. And so I was taking classes at Playwrights, and that was really fun. But, I needed a job. So I ended up with a job for a year, but it didn't pay very much.
Okay.
I was a receptionist. They don't have really receptionists anymore, but, I was actually someone who actually answered.
Especially now with people working from home or scattered or whatever.
Well, you can't get a live person to answer a phone
I know.
anymore.
I hate it.
But I was the person who go, oh, hello, and so that
I could see you having a nice voice for a telephone.
Oh, I really kind of loved it. And we had good people. I worked at a speaker agency, and we had people like Leonard Nimoy was a client.
Nice.
And Adam West called in one time. And, and I said to him, Batman?
He never gets that, I'm assuming.
And he was like, could be.
I think he relishes it. He's not one of those he's not Fred Munster.
No, he was
Fred Gwynn.
Oh,
he was a real serious actor, and he didn't like that was his association as an actor for the rest of his life.
Yeah,
it really bothered him.
Yeah, it's surprising because I guess my cousin Vinny was serious. Right. So. But it's interesting. Yeah. But Adam West was he was kind of delighted, actually.
Right. Yeah, I bet.
Yeah,
because he's one of those guys that went to all those,
the Comic-Cons
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, he milked it for all it was worth.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And why not? It was a fun show. I watched that show every week when I was a kid.
Loved it. I thought it was.
It still holds up. It's so goofy.
It's so funny.
Yeah,
really funny.
It really is great.
Yeah. So And I always wanted to be Julie Newmar. I always
wow.
thought Julie Newmar,
Yeah,
my God,
I bet.
who doesn't want to look like
Right.
that, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And a lot of guys,
Yeah.
you know, had their crush on her too.
of course.
Yeah.
So there was the Adam West for the girls and Julie Newmar for the guys.
Yeah.
And so it worked out nice.
And there was, I'm sure somebody liked Robin.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
I always felt like I don't know why, he always annoyed me a little bit.
I think he was supposed to be annoying.
I guess so, right?
Yeah. It's like the little sidekick.
So let's just talk the rest of the episode about
About
60s sitcoms and.
It could work. You
Well,
know?
yeah, I'll have you on another time. We'll do that. Okay, because we have a lot to talk about. You're a very busy woman. So then you became a teacher, and
Right. So then after a while, I just said, okay, I have this teacher license. I guess I better use it. So I became a teacher. And then what happens, unfortunately, with teaching is you get sucked into it. Like you don't have, I had time to still write, but the other part of it, like the going to readings, I was doing a lot of one-act plays at the time.
okay,
So that didn't take too much time in the same way, but I did that. There were a few theaters that kind of nourished people doing that. Like you have a little one-act
Right.
play.
Cool.
They would do like these evenings, but that kind of dried up after a while.
all right.
And
Why do you think
so-
that happened?
I
Because it sounds like a great idea. I would love to go to something like
I
that.
think they just run out of money.
Right.
These little theater companies, and then they get kicked out of the space.
Right, and yeah,
You know, the
Sure.
gentrification on 42nd Street
right.
just killed all that.
Yeah.
You know, we used to do these one-act plays up in the fourth floor walk-up of this really, like, I'm surprised the building didn't fall down on us, you know. But it was great.
And how many one-act plays would be shown at a time?
Like 4 or 5.
That's great.
And
I
there would
love
be,
that.
There would be like an A program
Right.
from 7 to 9, and then a B program from 9
That's so
to
cool.
11.
I love that idea. We should bring that back.
Oh, I loved it so
I
much.
have to go to like Bushwick or something to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It was great.
Right.
And then at the same time, I just sort of discovered flash fiction.
Wow.
And that's,
So how long has that term been used?
well, I think it was actually coined by the fellow that is the editor of flash fiction, the Norton anthology, and James Thomas, I think, if I'm not.
But it's a relatively recent thing?
It's.
When does it go back to? What
it's,
decade?
I'm going to say it probably actually started in the 80s.
That's what I was going to guess.
But it's really caught on more in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I see that.
It's like so, it's everywhere.
Right.
It's really everywhere.
So you started talking about flash fiction. You want to talk about flash fiction, and then we'll get to poetry later, or vice versa?
Sure.
You're going to read flash fiction.
Yeah.
So you have the new book of flash fiction. I mean, you've done other flash fiction books before?
Yes, I have two. Well, I have a couple of chapbooks.
Right.
In 2010, I won a chapbook competition through Rope Walk Press, and it was judged by Robert Olin Butler,
Okay.
Pulitzer Prize winner. And when I entered the contest, I thought, I just want him to read my stories.
Right.
I didn't even think about winning, but it's like, I just want his eyes on,
That's great.
on my
And you wound
stories.
up winning. That's awesome.
Right, and so that really just gave me. I had been publishing flash fiction before,
Right.
in print journals.
Okay.
I did.
How far back does this go?
This was like the 90s.
Okay. And before the 90s, did you have any poetry books or any other kinds of books?
I
or-
didn't have any books until recently.
Okay.
The whole 90s and aughts or whatever we call
Right.
them. I didn't have any books,
Okay.
and then all of a sudden now I have 10 books or 11
Wow.
books.
You're a
Yeah,
busy woman.
yeah. Well,
Some of that is because you're not teaching anymore. You have more time to devote to it, or
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think
that
it
makes
just
sense.
I had a little bit more time to dedicate myself,
Right.
and just certain opportunities.
push the mic a little closer to you. I'm
Okay.
going to make sure we pick you up, especially when you start reading. How about you read something from the book,
Okay.
and then we'll talk more.
Okay.
Because I want to make sure we get in some of your readings before
Sounds good.
as many as possible.
All right. So my book is called Just Outside the Tunnel of Love, and this is the title story. Just outside the tunnel of love, and Benny Jones telling me about Darlene. In other words, he pulled me through to unlove me. Something about how love is a crispy pepper 1 minute, but then it goes wilty and soft. I told him I'm not a goddamn pepper and get to the goddamn point. Problem is, I gave Benny my heart too fast. My heart is a bristle I keep in my pocket, and I can never wait to give it away. Benny Jones sat in the boat in the tunnel of love, all squirm and tangle of words. Friends, he was saying, and didn't mean to. Then he pointed to a pin's worth of light right there in front of us. That's the future, he said. It gets bigger and brighter the closer we get, all beautiful and warm. I told Benny to shut the hell up. If we're not a thing, we're not a thing, but don't go making a movie out of it. When we did get outside the tunnel of love into the future Benny Jones had promised me would be warm and bright, I didn't see anything. I didn't feel anything. Just thought back to that summer of my grandmother's house where her old dog Punch got a fever and she was going to shoot him. How I stroked Punch's tan fur, telling him, "It's okay, boy," when I knew damn well it wasn't. My heart wriggling around in my pocket, even then, with no damn place for it to go.
Oh, man. That's some ending.
Thank you.
So, was there a Benny in your life, or this is completely
Oh,
fiction?
you know, Benny is like, I have Bennies and Charlies and Harrys.
Right.
Like,
Well, those are good names
Yeah.
for characters.
they're all like composites of
Right.
guys that I've known, guys that my women friends have known.
Okay.
You
Right.
know what I mean?
Sure.
They're like,
Yeah. They're guys.
yeah, they're guys.
Yeah.
They do what guys do.
In the tunnel of love sometimes.
Yeah.
I love that, the tunnel of love. It's a great place to start a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you.
So, how long did it take you to put that book together?
Well, I had written a lot of the stories. I would say the stories were written over maybe 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And then, the first book that I had, Just All Wrong for This, that took a little bit longer to put together, and I won the Blue Light contest.
Well, you win a lot of awards, don't you?
Yeah, that's how I've had most of the books published,
Right.
like through contests.
Cool.
So
Now I should have introduced you as the award-winning Francine Witte.
So anyway, Blue Light published it, and then just a few years went by, and I asked Diane if she would do another book. Diane Frank
Okay.
is the publisher of
Got
Blue
it.
Light Press,
Right.
and she said, "Oh yeah, it'd be great." So when she said yes, it took me a few months to kind of like decide what's going to go in.
Is there
order.
is it a thematic book at all, or is there a connection to the stories, or it's just you felt like the best things you've written in the last few
Well,
years?
that's probably it. Like for me, I said, well, every story in here has to be what I consider, for me, a 10. And I think that should be true of any book.
Right.
When you put a book together, make sure everything in there, no fillers,
Right.
no stories that, I'm just sort of like rounding out the theme. Like, don't do it.
Right.
Because the readers they're not stupid.
Right.
They pick up.
And it's better to leave them wanting more than saying,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
this is too much.
Well, or maybe you're not ready to put a book together if you don't have enough stories that you like. They don't have to be a 10
Right.
in the world,
Right.
but for you.
Right. They should have meaning to you.
Right. They
Right.
should be as good.
If they don't mean something to you, then why put them in the book? Right.
Well, and they should be something that you're really proud of.
Right.
So.
But it's a hard thing to do. And like my book, I don't know if I put too many pieces in the book. I was kind of hoping my friend, I don't know if he's listening to this, but I was hoping he maybe would have said, that was too many, or maybe take this out. And he didn't. I don't know if they're looking back at it. If it's hard, because sometimes you look at something and it may not be good enough to put in a book, but for some reason it had a meaning to you. That's where the line is difficult. Like, it means something to you, and you can't tell whether it would mean something to somebody else.
Well, I think if it means something to you, because I believe in a universality.
But I'm sorry. Do you think there's a difference, though, when you put a poetry book and a flash fiction book when it comes to that, what we just talked about?
I think they're probably the same in the sense...
Because I was just wondering... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, in the sense of you want everything in there to be something you feel really proud of.
Right.
Even if it's the kind of thing you sent out 100 times and nobody ever took, but you liked it.
Right.
And this is like, one day people will catch up and they'll get it. You're not trying to push it through.
Right.
Those are the ones you leave out. I think, you might decide on you have a theme, or you want to put some funny stories in and then some serious stories.
Right, you want to balance it.
Yeah. So.
Well, I want you to read another one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, in flash fiction, people are always asking me, what is flash fiction? So, there is a very famous magazine that came out this past week or so. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention the name, but it had a thumbprint, an orange thumbprint, and in the center of the thumbprint were this like open mouth, and you were asked to sort of put that together, and it's Donald Trump. It's his fingerprint,
right.
Orange fingerprint, and so I feel like that's flash fiction. You're given just enough information, and then the reader fills in the rest.
Interesting. I never thought of it that way.
That's what makes it different than just a 300-word story.
Right, because like I told you when we were sitting outside, I was published in a multimedia online magazine, mm-hmm. and some of the things I gave for the publication were labeled as flash fiction. Mm-hmm. But I have to admit, I hadn't heard that term before, and wasn't setting out to write flash fiction.
Right.
It's just a lot of my poems become more story-like than a poem.
Right. Yeah. Like it's a very thin line.
Right.
Between poetry, flash, micros, prose poems. It's all like
Okay. So what's the next one you're going to read? So what's the backstory now?
So anyway. There's a 6-word story that it's very famous. Ernest Hemingway wrote it. It's called "For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn." Okay, that's the whole story.
Right.
So, it's an example of flash because you're supposed to fill in the story. So I based a story on that, and it's called "Another Take on the Story."
Okay.
Maybe there had been a baby shower, and there was a registry with a pair of shoes on the list, but the baby's grandmother never checked the list, having spent the last few months in Europe, and she picked up the identical pair of shoes in a shop in Barcelona on one of her typical sprees. Or maybe they were being sold, never used, because the baby himself was such a charitable little chap and said, in baby talk, of course, "Mama, I have everything I need. Please sell my unused, never-worn shoes and give them to some unlucky baby, and give the money to some unlucky baby who doesn't have the good fortune to be born to you and Pop." Or maybe still the father's mistress snuck them into his briefcase, hoping the father would find them and realize what a generous soul she is, and he would leave his selfish wife like he was always saying he would. Or maybe the father wasn't even sure in the first place that the kid was his after all. And who the hell cares if the little brat runs around shoeless, and he's just lucky not to live near a hillside. But most likely, it's exactly what you thought, and the baby actually died.
Oh, man. For some reason, I had a feeling that could be the way it was going to go. Mm-hmm. By the way, the baby is very well-spoken and charitable, too.
Very, yes.
Yes. I love that. So that was really an Ernest Hemingway story? Those words?
Yes.
Where was that?
I don't know, but it's sort of always brought up as an example of the shortest flash fiction, the 6-word story.
Well, how do you get shorter than that, really?
You really can't.
But it tells a story really succinctly.
It does, yes, it does.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. And I love that you wrote a story based on that. So cool.
Yeah. Thank you. So I do a lot of stories based on prompts, Mm-hmm. I find them very helpful, both in poetry and in writing.
Right.
And so I was in...
What can be a prompt?
Well...
What's considered a prompt for you?
A prompt could be something like for this story, this next story, I was in a workshop, and Pam Painter, who's a very, very well-known flash fiction writer and a short story writer, she said, write a road trip story.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I said, well, I'm going to go left with this.
Right.
And this is what I wrote.
Okay.
Just another road trip story. Throw in a woman, throw in a man, throw in a broke-down Chevy, throw in a body in the trunk, throw in a gas station, bramble and brush, hopper pumps, and rattlesnake shiver. Throw in the hot armpit sun. Throw in the woman's husband, who of course is in the trunk. Throw in the way you eyed the DoorDash guy. No, that's another story. Throw in Arizona. A road trip story is always Arizona. Desert and plump of dune in the background. The man, the woman, the husband in the trunk pulling into a gas station. Throw in a lonely pop machine where only a quarter will roll out a Coke as crisp and cold as movie Christmas. Throw in the gas station attendant about to open the trunk. I'm going to check the spare for air, he probably says. Throw in the way your husband doesn't look at you anymore, not with anything close to desire. Throw in how you kind of sort of understand the woman in the road trip story and whatever she did to put her husband in the trunk. Throw in the man throwing his meat fist on the trunk. Thanks anyway, old man, we just need gas. Throw in the smell of rotting corpse working into the Arizona air. Throw in how your husband goes corpse when you tell him your life is a desert and his love would be like water. Throw in the gas station attendant going fisheye with suspicion. Throw in how he sidles inside and rings up the sheriff. Throw in a shootout at the end of the road. Throw in your refrigerator, dune in the background. Throw in no one there to check if anyone needs air. Throw in you just sitting there with no idea how this story will end.
It's great. I love how you introduced a couple different subjects and then came back to them. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And I like I like the form. You know,
the repetition.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
It told a story, but a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you mind if I read one?
Oh, please.
So, I told you while we were sitting outside, I worked for an AIDS charity. This story was one of two, I think, that talks about AIDS crisis in a different way. And this came up on my memories on Facebook. So I think I wrote it a year ago. But anyway, I used to, be involved with AIDS community in the 90s, and sometimes the thought about that comes back to me.
Sure.
And I forgot who it was, but it was a famous actress, and I don't remember who it was, who said that sometimes she laughs at the wrong in the wrong place, at a funeral or in a church or something, and she doesn't mean to. And so this is what came out of me hearing it. It's called Laughter Instead of Crying. It was 1996, a memory that stays in a place in my heart that will never leave. My knees wobbled as I looked at my partner lying in the casket, his skin powdered and gray, what was left of his beautiful head of hair neatly combed. The suit he bought for our anniversary pressed smooth as if new off the rack. His polka dot tie held in a place by the tie clasp with his initials spelled out in diamonds. He had style in life, and I thought he'd be critical of his appearance if he was standing next to me. With shaking hands, I made the sign of the cross, held his hand, and stared at him. And then without warning, I burst out in loud, uncontrollable laughter. The room got so quiet you could hear my heartbeat. No one moved an inch. I turned around and gathered my composure and spoke. I'm sorry I've cried enough for a lifetime. We both shared so much love and so much pain. Like the first time we held hands walking in the village and got attacked and beaten by a mob of angry teens hurling homophobic slurs. We sobbed when Larry was first diagnosed with HIV, when longtime friends and family slowly eased out of our lives. I cried like a baby when he was in the ICU with pneumocyst pneumonia. I don't know if I pronounced that right. And the hospital staff wouldn't let me come in the room and hold his hands because I was in family. No, we both had a lifetime worth of crying. This hurts too much. I'm all cried out. With that, my friends who were brothers that somehow had managed to still be with me that day came to me and we held each other without speaking. We had all been through this grief countless times in our lives. Some things just understood and no need for words to describe. That day was a defining moment in my life, and I still laugh sometimes instead of crying.
That's really like heart-wrenching.
Yeah, thanks.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. So, should we talk a little bit about your poetry? Because you got a book coming out, and then we'll go back to flash fiction?
Sure.
Okay. So, I forgot the name of your poetry collection that's coming out.
Some Distant Pin of Light.
Okay. And tell me about that.
Well, that's I've had 2 full-length collections. I've had I think 3 chapbooks.
Which one do you write more, poetry or flash fiction?
That's a good question. I usually was writing more poetry, but then I switched to flash fiction. But now I'm sort of leaning back a little bit towards poetry.
Okay.
It kind of comes and goes.
And the book that's coming out, are they new poems or is it a collection from different times of your life? Or
they're probably not too old. I would say they're maybe in the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And I tend to, I write about the same themes. My themes that I like with poetry and with flash are love, relationships, family, usually about, some dysfunctional family.
Right.
And I also like to write about the environment in some contexts.
Okay.
More of, a lot of my poems tend to be about, how we started out, the earth started out so nice until man got here.
Right.
And
the destruction has been accelerated the last couple hundred years. So.
Yeah. And it's just like, I guess no one's listening, it just frustrates me so much.
Right.
How no one's really listening.
Am I right in saying that I, from what you've read so far, there's definitely a little bit of dark humor in what you write? Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
More so in the flash.
I was going to say that. So
Yeah.
the poetry is more emotion or more?
Yeah, my poetry tends to be more serious, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And the flash, I think flash lends itself a little bit more to humor.
Right. Except in my case, just there.
Right. I write a lot of sad things too.
Right.
So, but I write prose poetry maybe a little bit more than I used to.
Okay.
Prose poems are that's a whole other genre, where it's like written in paragraph form,
Right.
and it tends to just have more of a flow to it than when you just write in broken lines.
Right. So what's the step between prose poetry and flash fiction then?
Well, there's a form of flash called the micro. The micro is an even shorter flash.
Okay.
And it has more of a story than a prose poem. So, a prose poem is sort of like just somebody musing on something.
Right.
Where a micro, there's an actual character that has a problem, and they solve it, or
right. Okay.
or they don't.
Cool.
So
I definitely want you to read at least one more before we go. But I was just wanted to ask you a little bit about Flash Boulevard.
okay.
Yeah. Tell the listeners about that.
So I'm the flash fiction editor of 2 journals, and it's really kind of fun. And one is the South Florida Poetry Journal, and the other one is Flash Boulevard. And Flash Boulevard is connected to poet George Wallace's, who was on your podcast a few weeks ago.
Right.
His Poetry Bay empire. And because George does so many things.
That's incredible.
He's like, I always ask him if there's like 10 of you,
Right, I know. Well, I don't get that he sits around binge watching the latest HBO.
He might.
Who knows? I'll have to ask him.
Yeah. So he had he started a Facebook group a few years ago called Poetry Bay, and he has poetrybay.org, I think, which is an online journal. But then he started a Facebook group, which was going to be like a little news thing.
Right.
And eventually it morphed into other things, and one of them was Flash Boulevard, which was a column. He said, do you want to do a column of, where you get flash fiction? So then it went to the web eventually, and it's been really great because Flash Boulevard is unique in terms of online journals because we feature one writer each week.
Right. I really enjoy it. I just recently started.
Yeah, we'll take one writer and show maybe like 3 or 4 of their stories.
Right.
And I don't think anybody else does that.
Right.
And writers get really excited about it.
Sure.
Because, it's a different thing when you can see a group of people's stories.
Sure.
And not only in a book,
Right.
but just like...
And how do you come upon the authors that are featured?
Well, I have a pretty good online presence at this point.
Right.
I'm like on Twitter a lot because I follow a lot of people, and because of all the journals out there, and if I get something,
it's just almost like a job for you.
Well, it kind of is because like I'll get up every day and I'll write, and I'll then I have to do editing, and then I have to do this, and I also do these little prompt workshops myself.
I mean, it's really cool because you told me earlier, I don't know if on the show or outside, that you're retired, so you've developed a life that's really sustaining. It gives you something to really look forward to. Yeah,
I'm like never bored.
Right.
I just don't even know what that word means. And I just, I like to, there's always like I can be reading flash or poetry. I'm often in a workshop. I do workshops of my own.
Nice.
Besides going to readings, and so there's always something.
You're a very busy woman.
Yeah, there's always something to do.
So listen, why don't you read another one? I want to make sure you get at least another one in before we leave.
Well, this one is a little bit different. It has more of an environmental twist to it, and it's a little bit dark, really dark, actually.
Okay. I can handle it.
This is called Terror at the Top of the World. They're coming, Jean-Louis says. It's louder than yesterday. His father is stirring their supper, beans in a can he pounded open with a stone. Maybe, Jean-Louis says, we should go norther. There is no norther, his father says. He pours some of the beans into his shoe and gives the can to Jean-Louis. I'm not even cold anymore, Jean-Louis says, and look, the ice is turning back to water. Good, his father says. We will need that to drink. I can smell the smoke from all the fires, Jean-Louis says. I couldn't smell them yesterday. That's why we have to practice not breathing, his father says. Soon all the air will be gone. He takes a deep breath, his chest rising up with it. It's good we got here first, Jean-Louis says, eating the last of the beans. It's good the others didn't believe us. The air explodes out of his father's mouth. His father squints, looking south and then souther. They believe us now. There will be hundreds, there will be thousands of them, Jean-Louis says, millions. They will take all our water, take all our air. Don't be afraid, his father says. The weaker ones will die off. Some won't even make it. We're going to make it, right? Jean-Louis says. Come on, his father says, practice with me. Try not to smell the smoke. The two of them standing straight as poles, filling their chests with dimming air. Near, then nearer, the sound of thud boots on the ice crack, the sound of backpack babies crying, then whimpering, then not.
Terrific. You're a really good writer. I'm so glad you took time to come on the show. Let me see your book again. listeners, you've heard Francine read these fantastic stories.
They're all in the book.
They're all in the book. And the best way to get this?
Oh, on Amazon. You can get them on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. Or if you go to my website, which I just put up about maybe 3 months ago, FrancineWitte.com, my name, FrancineWitte.com. And, you can buy my books. And if you want to get, it'll link you to Amazon, or it'll link you to, if you want to get a signed copy, it'll link you how to get in touch with me. You can see videos of me. Because I'll eventually put this up there.
Right. Does it also mention events that you're doing, read-ins or?
I don't have like an events page. I should put one up.
Yeah.
But it has like links to my publications and just about anything you want to know. Because FrancineWitte.com is like one-stop shopping.
All right.
So yeah.
We still have a little bit of time, and if you don't mind, I want to read something I wrote today. So one of my guests, a few guests back, Paul Shack, I used to work with him. He's a barista. We worked in a cafe together, and he was on this, and then he recently did a play, Romeo and Juliet, in the park that we talked about with non-gender specific actors.
Right.
Or roles.
Yeah.
It was great. But he reached out to me and asked me if I would consider doing a read-in, a character in a read-in of a play that he's doing with a friend of his. And this is very new territory for me. I've never been involved in a play. And I don't know if, because I'm now doing that with him, the idea of acting came out in a story. I was working today. We're getting the cafe opened, and this line popped in my head, and I found up writing a quick thing out of it. The first line of the story. It's called Well-Rehearsed Show. Sarah told the story with her words like a soliloquy, softly spoken. She was an actress after all. It was mesmerizingly sensual and captivating too. But he hardly understood it. He wasn't very educated after all. One thing he did know was words weren't free. There was a price to pay for her well-rehearsed show. They had been down this road many times before. He still loved her immensely. It was something true enough, though he wasn't great at revealing that fact at all. So he let her speak, hoping to grasp for the truth somewhere in her monologue that seemed to go on for longer than his attention span could keep up with, grasping clumsily at straws. Hoping that after the curtain dropped, she would still be here with him instead of taking her act somewhere else to another man who might understand her more.
I like that. I like how you kind of like bring it into like real life and
yeah. Thanks. So towards the end of the show, is there anything that you want to part the listeners with besides what we've talked about?
Well, just to keep going with whatever you're doing, because it took me a long time till things sort of took off, you know?
Right.
And it's important to like always just kind of not believe in yourself, but like just do whatever you like to do.
So you went from that 13-year-old girl who wrote those poems and have traveled quite a few places in life, and now you're at a good place.
I feel good, and I feel like I don't need to, be at that New York Times bestseller level of success. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that.
Right.
Like if they're not that, then they're not writing.
Right.
And I think that's a big mistake. I think, there's so many outlets for publication these days. Like it's okay to publish online. It used to not be. I think it was grounds on.
That's much more accepted. Just this, I mean, that's one thing good about the internet. There's so many ways to get your art out there.
Yeah. And so I would just say, write, send your work out, publish, go to workshops, do whatever you have to do. Just keep at it. And
I started writing really just for myself and to get emotions that I had stored up or stress, things that I was going through. Then I started realizing, I liked writing and I liked making up or telling stories. Occasionally, it could be partially about me, like that last story I just read. It's not really about me, but, it was about actors.
Yeah.
And then, it just opened up a lot of doors for me.
It really does.
Yeah. I met really cool people like you. I'm having a great time. And I don't have that aspiration. The aspiration for me has already been in some ways met or exceeded.
Absolutely.
I didn't expect all this.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's good.
Yes. So we're going to play the theme song. And sadly, it's time to go.
Okay.
Nobody's going to kick us out, but...
Yeah.
So you've been listening to Storytelling on Orchard Street. I'm your host, Pete Salamita, and we had the pleasure of chatting with the terrific flash fiction writer and poet, Francine Witte. Go check her out. And again, the studio's in the P&T Knitwear bookstore. They have readings also. They have a great collection of books and nice people that work here. They have a cafe. So come down here and check us out. And hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. Thank you all.
Thank you.